I'm Hugo Balta.
And I'm Samantha Lampkin.
Next on Chicago Politics, Alderman Byron Sigcho-Lopez, 25th Ward, is with us front and center to discuss the response to the city's housing crisis.
And to understand the root causes of the housing crisis, I speak with residents in the Woodlawn area about the troubling history of discrimination known as redlining in the segment For the People.
And in the Voices segment, Chamille Weddington, co-owner of Sweet Cheesecake in the West Side neighborhood of Austin, talks to you about the challenges of the maldistribution of resources.
Chicago Politics is next.
Housing is a fundamental human right that is essential for the well-being and dignity of all individuals. However, for many Black and Latino communities in Chicago, this basic right is often out of reach due to systemic inequalities and discrimination. As a result, many families are forced to live in substandard housing conditions or face homelessness. Armed with an executive order to tackle homelessness in the city, Mayor Brandon Johnson named Cindy Soto as Chief Homeless Officer. She agreed to be a guest on this program, but she canceled at the last minute. However, we are grateful to have Alderman Byron Sigcho-Lopez, who represents the 25th Ward and chairs the Committee on Housing and Real Estate. He is front and center with us today. Alderman Sigcho-Lopez, welcome to the program.
Thank you for the invitation, Hugo. Great to be here.
I would like to begin with Mayor Brandon Johnson's new initiative in naming Chief Cindy Soto as entrusted in developing this 5-year plan, not only to respond to homelessness in Chicago, but also address affordable housing. What are your thoughts about this idea?
Well, it's critical that we have an executive order to cut on the red tape and all the systemic issues that we have by being intentional. We have today in the city of Chicago over 69,000 people who are unhoused. 20,000 of them are CPS children. In fact, in the last count is 24,000. So we do need a strategy, and more than anything else, we need to be intentional to recognize that housing is a human right. It is the cornerstone of building community. I represent a historic port of entry like Pilsen, Little Village. So we understand how people have worked hard to build the neighborhoods that we see today. But we cannot do it alone, and it is important that the city has a clear strategy to build housing, to build more public and affordable housing, that we are unafraid to speak about the need of creating more housing options. Today, developers, and talk about big developers who have empty homes. We have 80,000 vacant units at the same time as we have 69,000 people unhoused. It's unconscionable and unacceptable when we have corporations, big corporations, developers, to have so many vacancies when the need is so great. We have agencies like the Chicago Housing Authority that could be doing more to address the need of housing, and in general, more policies that can help us alleviate the need for housing by addressing speculation, vacancies, and the disinvestment that has been a neglect for so long in our city. Federal, state, city governments working together to address these issues critical for the well-being of our communities.
So you're in favor of the mayor having this emphasis by naming a chief of homelessness and cutting through perhaps some of the bureaucracy in order to find the answers to solving homelessness and affordable housing?
Certainly, I think that having a chief homelessness officer help us direct the policies in an intentional way. I think for so long we have neglected housing. We have allowed speculators on the market to normalize so many people who are unhoused today. Today in the city of Chicago, we have an opportunity to work together to address the needs that we have in the city. We see new neighbors coming in, but we also have seen neglect for so many people who have left the city, quite frankly, for the lack of affordable and public housing options, even when they have been promised to them. In the case of the Black community, for instance, 300,000 Black residents have left the city of Chicago. We have 200,000 people in the CHA waiting list. So we do think it's critical that we work together to develop the intentional policies that hopefully can can undo the horrible legacy that we have inherited when we see policies like redlining, we see policies of disinvestment, the tear down of public housing, to leave it up to speculators to create affordable housing. We see that there's not an option. We do have the intention to make sure that we are clear on the role of government to create affordable and public housing.
And you've mentioned this already in regards to redlining, discriminatory practices that have denied mortgage loans to people of color based on their race or ethnicity, that have led to the segregation of many neighborhoods with limited resources and opportunities in the city of Chicago. How do we begin to right decades of wrongs in the making? How do we correct that?
Well, but first recognizing the issues. I think that not too long ago we had politicians that were rating our laws at the same time as there were property tax attorney lawyers, appeal attorneys. So when we see the level of corruption that have put the burden on the small homeowners, on the working people to subsidize developers, let's remember the Constitution of Illinois has banned, in my opinion, unconstitutionally, rent control, something that I do think should be done. We need to do a lot more to alleviate small homeowners. Today in Pilsen, Little Village, we have gotten some of the largest property tax increases after the city has continued with policies of displacement. A few years ago, Lori Lightfoot, in the middle of Mayor Lightfoot, in the middle of a pandemic, offered us a landmarking designation for almost 1,000 homes. In the middle of a pandemic, when small homeowners couldn't even afford minor repairs, worse, to be able to replace windows and roofs and porches in one of the oldest neighborhoods in the city, was a clear indication that the previous mayor wanted to displace residents from communities like Pilsen, Little Village, Chinatown even. But when we have intentional local plans, we've seen that communities, for instance, like Chinatown, now it is one of the only Chinatowns in the country that is growing. I had the honor and opportunity to represent a community, and in the middle of a pandemic, we worked together to develop alternatives.
Alderman Byron Sigcho-Lopez, representing the 25th Ward, is with us front and center. After the short break, we will continue the conversation on Chicago's housing crisis and the impact that wave after wave of migrants arriving in our city is having. Plus, lead correspondent Samantha Lampkin visits Woodlawn residents who are feeling the pressure as housing and rent prices continue to climb. All that and more on Chicago Politics.
Hi everyone, I'm Ashley Munson, inviting you to join me and my Chief of Staff, Justin James, and the band with no name to the series premiere of Munson Tonight. We'll do our level best to make politics make sense. Join the conversation Thursday at 7:30 p.m. on CAN TV Cable Channel 19, or stream live on cantv.org, or on the new CAN TV Plus app. Hyperlocal news and public affairs. Experience the power of community television.
You're watching Chicago Politics, where we focus on the responses to social issues that are challenging our communities. Alderman Byron Sigcho-Lopez, who represents the 25th Ward and chairs the Committee on Housing and Real Estate, is with us front and center. Once again, Alderman Byron, thank you very much for joining us.
Good to be here.
I'd like to talk to you about something that happened late last year. You were among the leaders on the City Council calling for more accountability from the Chicago Housing Authority following an investigation by Blood Club Chicago and the Illinois Answers Project that put front and center the agency's hundreds of empty, deteriorating units. We asked CHA CEO Tracy Scott to join us on this program, but her schedule did not permit it. Tell us about what happened and tell us about the demand to do better for the more than 200,000 members of the community that have been waiting for housing.
Well, when we have such a need of housing in our communities, it is unconscionable that we have hundreds of vacancies that could be easily be used. It was a report that really caught our attention when we see hundreds of vacancies at the same time where we have people who have been in the waiting list for 2 decades in many occasions. Promises that were made, public housing that was teared down with the promise of being rebuilt that was never built. So it was important that we bring the CEO so that we discuss directly with the City Council what are the policies to hold the CHA accountable to the promises and the reserves that we steal over there in the CHA to create affordable public housing, which is a dire need right now in our communities.
And since that incident, and since the demands from yourself and other members of city councils, has CHA come to the table and said, yes, we will be more transparent, yes, we will have these meetings, yes, we will be accountable to the people that we serve?
Well, we asked the CEO to come to our city council meetings quarterly. I think at least we got a commitment to come at least twice a year. And it's critical for us to look at the progress that the agency has done. In my opinion, the CHA has stopped creating public housing. They had privatizing land. There were land dispositions where promised public land for affordable and public housing was given to private developers. I used to represent the Habla homes in the previous remap, and I saw with my own eyes the conditions of the units and also the promises that were broken. Thousands of units that were promised to residents that never were delivered, but now we have land apparently to give to stadiums and other purposes when it's such a need of public housing. It is unconscionable. I do think that the CEO has a lot of work to do, and I think the City Council has the responsibility to hold her accountable to deliver on the vision that Mayor Johnson was elected to do, to create affordable housing and public housing for the people who have been waiting for way too long. When you look at the number of people, 300,000 black residents displaced from the city of Chicago, is a whole city that was displaced. And we are not going to accept that as the norm. We don't accept residents who are being evicted or worse than unhoused or have to double down when we do have the resources. It's not because we don't have the resources or means. It's because we have poor administration and management, and quite honestly, sometimes corrupt practices that had impeded the city to deliver on that vision.
Let's talk now about the many new arrivals from Texas that are now living independently, living away from the shelter system and confronting many of the Chicago's affordable housing market eviction practices that many that you've mentioned, many of those barriers. Residents, and you've said, especially from the black communities who know all too well the challenges of housing instability, have vented their frustrations in shouting matches in town halls and arguments on online forums over mixed county, state, and federal funds to support asylum seekers. How does the city assist newcomers as well as lifelong residents who have similar barriers to permanent housing?
Well, since August of 2022, we have seen a tremendous amount of new neighbors who have come, over 40,000 new neighbors now in the city of Chicago. When you see the number of residents who have arrived to the city of Chicago without any plan from the federal government, in fact, with the governor from Texas, quite honestly, using human trafficking practices to put people in inhumane conditions just to destabilize the city. That is the whole purpose of that practice, political gain and using people's lives for their goals, which is unconscionable, unacceptable, and cruel, inhumane. What we would believe is important that we work with the federal government to once and for all address the issues of immigration. I think the federal government has a responsibility to look at policies in the countries of origin. I, for one, have been calling on President Biden on many occasions to meet with the Mexican president that has a detailed plan on how we can do that and stop the migration to begin with. There are things that we can do in the countries of origin, and the federal government has refused to do that. In fact, the policies implemented have accelerated the migration and bringing even more people to the border. Secondly, I do think cities like Chicago need assistance from the federal and state government. Finally, I think the state and county government have come to the table for quite some time, especially up to the end of December of last year. There was a refusal of any assistance from the federal, state, or even county government to help the city of Chicago. We were basically alone with all the needs that are already described that we already had for housing. So we are now working a little bit more collaboratively with the state and the county governments to address this need. But the federal government must bring more support for housing in general. HUD, an agency that is supposed to deliver on a mission of housing for people across the country, has not done so. So now we have a responsibility to push for more funding, for more support for current neighbors as well as new neighbors. I do think that this tactic of divide and conquer is not new. This reminds me about the important coalition that Mayor Washington did it actually with one of our leaders in our community, Rudy Lozano. Rudy Lozano was assassinated only a few days after Harold Washington was was elected mayor. And we're proud to support, and we are proud to having a mayor like Mayor Washington. Some of the policies, including the Sanctuary City, was implemented by Mayor Washington. We are proud to be a sanctuary city, a city that respects human rights, and it's something to be exemplified and be proud of. Unfortunately, without the support, and worse, when we have Republican governors like Abbott in Texas undermining and trying to destroy the city, quite honestly, before the convention, it is a titanic task, but it's a call for action and unity among our communities to address current needs as well as the new needs that we have as a city. I do believe that the means are here. The federal government just sent billions of dollars for more wars in the Middle East, to more displacement. We have now today in the city of Chicago not only people coming from South America, we have people coming from Sudan and even Asia because of these senseless wars and military budgets that keep growing. Where is the funding for housing? Where is the funding for education, for environmental justice? The funding is there. Unfortunately, the priorities are broken.
Collaboration is key to success in tackling this issue and other issues, and certainly looking at the proper funding and solving problems like affordable housing, homelessness, and others. Alderman Byron Sigcho-Lopez, representing the 25th Ward, thank you very much for your time and for your insights.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Chicago's affordable housing market and eviction practices have plagued Black and brown communities for decades, with systemic policies favoring the interests of landlords over tenants. Chicago Politics lead correspondent Samantha Lampkin spoke to residents in the Woodlawn area about a history of failed Band-Aid solutions. Samantha?
Thank you, Hugo. On today's For the People, we're looking into the heart of a growing crisis that's hitting close to home for many Chicagoans. As many of the city's neighborhoods become gentrified, so do concerns about housing affordability. The question is, are we being priced out by design? According to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, affordable housing is generally defined as housing on which the occupant is paying no more than 30% of gross income for housing costs, including utilities. However, the definition of affordable housing has shifted in the eyes of many, wondering if they'd ever find a place to call home. To understand the root causes of this crisis, we need to take a look back at the troubling history of housing discrimination known as redlining. Now, this practice systemically denied loans and housing opportunities to people of color in certain neighborhoods, creating segregation and inequality. The Fair Housing Act outlawed redlining in 1968, and near the end of his life, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. helped lead the Chicago Freedom Movement, which inspired the act. But its legacy continues in the form of modern-day redlining. We know redlining is real. What do you think about the history of discrimination, even getting Black and brown people into a home?
Really, this economic segregation is the sad, sort of shameful history in Chicago. There's so much I love about Chicago. There's so much that Chicago gives families, but what it has denied so many families for over the years, economic opportunity. And it has been systematic. It has not been random. It was intentional. There were policies and practices put into place to deny home ownership from families.
Overcoming challenges and creating a way for solutions is one of the focal points for the YWCA.
We work with the Chicago Housing Authority, which is a HUD program. They provide residents who've they vetted, and they're in this called Choose to Own program. And so they want to purchase a home. They want to own a home. And so we facilitate that by walking them through the process.
The programs that you all offer, while they sound good, do you think that it's just a Band-Aid?
No, I think when people are housed, especially housed securely, they have a different perspective on their life.
I spoke with residents from all walks of life whose stories once painted a troubling picture. Take Ms. Scott, for example, a lifelong Chicagoan and former CHA resident who decided to take a chance and join YWCA's Choose to Own program.
There are a lot of programs out here that are available, but a lot of that information doesn't get in neighborhoods like mine. That's one of the things I'm really grateful with the Choose to Own program. That program made the impossibility a possibility.
Ms. Scott was not alone in her journey to own a home. According to a recent report by the Chicago Housing Authority, the median rent in the city has skyrocketed by nearly 20% in the past 5 years alone. Now, despite their best efforts, middle and upper middle class individuals and families find themselves dealing with slumlords and even priced out of the neighborhoods they aspire to call home. Something that new homeowner Kelly Smith knows all about. She faced many renters' woes and decided to take the leap into home ownership.
You're never trapped. The society may put into your mind that it's closed off to you, that you do not deserve, nor can you obtain this, but that's not true. Anyone can do it.
As the housing landscape makes changes, many things still remain the same. Higher home buying and rental price pinches are real, but there's also a silver lining and many success stories from programs like those at the YWCA and more. They create a legacy of hope for many, like Miss Scott and Miss Smith. Now, Hugo, as you just saw, there are many success stories that come with different programs like those of the YWCA, but not everyone is afforded those opportunities like the Choose to Own program or different credit building things. So what they must continue to do is fight for their rights and advocate for themselves to make sure that they're getting the best housing opportunities that they can get.
Yeah, you see those success stories, and unfortunately, sometimes they are the exception, not the norm. What can people do to better their situation?
Well, I think one thing that we can really do is hold our city officials accountable. As Alderman Byron said earlier, it's all about strategy. And as we see, some strategies aren't even being implemented when it comes to housing. Now, discrimination is one thing, but also when you get into these neighborhoods, you're not offered the same types of resources that many neighborhoods are offered. So when you're working with realtors, get a realtor that you can trust. And also, again, making sure city officials are being held accountable and not just relying on promises. Most of them are empty.
Yeah. Accountability, transparency, and collaboration, federal, state, and local level. Samantha, thank you very much.
Thank you, Hugo.
Next on Chicago Politics, Chamille Weddington, co-owner of Sweet Cheesecake, shares her lived experience about the critical need for investing in Chicago's historically underserved communities. She has the last word coming up. Also, Mayor Brandon Johnson's multi-million-dollar Plow the Sidewalks pilot program. Is it a good idea? Pass Fail is next.
On the series premiere of The Compassionate Competitor, I sit in conversation with NFL pro turned father, cowboy, and owner of the R. Hughes Ranch, Robert Hughes. Join the conversation Thursday, June 20th at 7 p.m. on CAN TV Cable Channel 19, or stream live on cantv.org or on the new CAN TV Plus app. Elevated conversation and storytelling. Experience the power of community television.
Now it's time for Pass Fail, where we take a look at our elected officials and see if they're making the grade. We begin with Mayor Brandon Johnson's Plow the Sidewalks pilot program. The city would allocate up to $3.5 million for a city-run sidewalk clearing operation, including Austin, Belmont Cragen, and Gage Park. Alderman Bill Conway has expressed concerns about the city being able to afford it on such a large scale. But I agree with Alderman Ronnie Mosley, who says we don't often think about sidewalks as a means of transportation and that cleaning sidewalks is critical for public safety. So pass. If the pilot program is approved, it would begin on December 31st, 2025. Next, Governor J.B. Pritzker supports Senate Bill 2930 that was recently passed by the General Assembly, which calls for Illinois-based nonprofit organizations that distribute $1 million or more to charitable groups that report their board makeup, that means race, gender, and sexual orientation, on their websites each year. Absolutely pass. Foundations and big nonprofits need to diversify their boards to reflect the communities they serve. Finally, a new study finds Illinois among the worst states for pay gaps between men and women. The study by QRFY with Jordo Research reports that across all the states, the average full-time man's wage was nearly $62,000 a year compared to just over $50,000 for women. Fail. Illinois ranks 14th worst in the nation. The difference in payroll is over $12,500. What do you think? We want to know. Send us your feedback to chicagopolitics@cantv.org. In this edition of Chicago Politics, we've been discussing housing equity. The challenge is more than just providing affordable housing. It's also about access to resources like quality schools, healthcare, and small businesses in neighborhoods that have only known disinvestment. Chamille Weddington, Austin resident and co-owner of Sweet Cheesecake, is our guest on Voices.
As an entrepreneur, I'm always excited about the opportunity to create an exchange of value and solve problems through industry. The privilege to sell a product is even more fulfilling when I can do this in my own community. However, in Austin, the place where I live, play, and do business, it's doubly challenging because of the maldistribution of resources. I'm the owner of Sweet Original Homemade Chicago Cheesecake, and I've had the unique on-the-ground experience of seeing how, where, and if dollars are placed in underserved communities like Austin. The maldistribution of financial support is not strictly due to a lack of money or policy. There's also the underlying issue of leadership. As a matter of fact, leadership is everything. Leadership is the ultimate driver of how issues of the people are perceived, how policy is interpreted and implemented, and ultimately how investment dollars are managed and distributed. You as the viewer and possible resident of a community that has been historically underserved are obligated to examine deeply and respond to not just governmental leadership, but the leadership of business organizations, like business chambers or even incubators, who are empowered to hold and distribute funding. Further, it's each of our responsibilities to respond to what we see or don't see leadership doing with our vote. A literal vote at the ballot, a vote in the form of a donation, or a vote as an acting member of a change organization. It's important that we be clear about the language that we use when we talk about the state of being underserved. Communities that are underserved are best identified by sight. They have a particular look and have great degrees of dysfunction. Their state of being is a detriment to the quality of life for its residents and the state of local businesses. You know a community is underserved by looking at one that is served. Neighborhoods in Chicago that thrive have a physical and emotional aesthetic made possible by years of adequate financial investment in infrastructure, housing, schools, police protection, and business development that is intentional. Served communities are transformational. They tend to be vibrant, bustling, inclusive, and inviting. This look is stark to the underserved community and brings clarity to the definition of underserved. Being observant of how leadership appoints wealth distributors, those institutional conduits that are local and who have their own internal politics and local agendas, is important to be aware of. As an entrepreneur, I know the lack of neighborhood investment and how it creates enough negative impact to destabilize the business environment or even make long-term viability impossible. In the end, ownership doesn't belong to the leaders and gatekeepers. It belongs to you, Chicago residents and voters. Will you challenge leadership and hold it accountable? Will you help to demand and ensure the effective leadership that we need and deserve?
A special thank you to Chamille Weddington and to Alderman Byron Sigcho-Lopez for joining us.
And a shout out to the folks from Woodlawn and the YWCA who took the time to speak with me. Thank you all for joining us on Chicago Politics,
where we go beyond the surface level discussions and dive deep into the societal issues that are impacting the diverse communities in Chicago.
Let's continue to keep the conversation going on social media at CanTV Chicago and via email chicagopolitics@cantv.org.
On behalf of all of us at Chicago Politics, thank you for investing your time with us.